Hey, good morning. Thanks for listening in. Have you noticed something about all successful people? It seems like they're all good storytellers. And it got me thinking about this. And I've always wondered, I don't have this amazing story of where I was homeless or I was in prison or I was, my parents split up when I was this and that and I did this. I had a pretty basic, I guess you could say, average or uneventful childhood. I had a beautiful childhood growing up. We were not wealthy, but we weren't poor. We were middle class. It was just vanilla. But you hear these stories of some of these successful entrepreneurs, and some of them are phenomenal stories, and that seems to be a huge draw. But one thing they all have in common is they rely on stories to teach to get their message out. Because stories, as we know, are engaging. Stories help us get to connect with the person that's telling it. Stories are very human. Stories are easy to listen to, right? Instead of just teaching, here's 3 things you can do better. And I'm huge at this. It's something that I really need to get better at. Because I'll have a tendency to just talk and ramble. And one of the things that I think I can do better is learning the art of storytelling. So one of the things that I've noticed about successful people is that they are noticers. They're noticers. So this is where the stories come from, is they simply notice things. They take note during their daily lives of something that happened, why it happened, and how there's a lesson to be learned about that. And I don't think that it's because they have special circumstances or special things that happen to them that make them, all that different. I think really what it is they notice their stories, they write them down, and they implement them into their teaching. I don't think that you have different stories than they do. Well, of course, you have different stories. I don't think you have any less significant stories than they do, or less stories, or fewer stories. I think it's that you may not be taking advantage of your stories like they are. Does that make sense? And so, it's just really a simple habit. I think it's a mindset thing. And I've built this into the cards with the Thinkubator section. If you're familiar with that, I've talked about it in the past. If you're not familiar with it, you can check it out and take a look. But however you use your system, your goal-setting system, you ought to have a way to record stories. Because there are things happening to you all the time. There are things that go on that may not even seem that significant to you, but make an impact on your journey. Little jogs here and there in the trail along the way, little things that you're learning, little diversions and things you learn, getting back on track. And sometimes we just go through life and that's just part of our journey and we don't really notice it that much. Does that make sense? So we don't write it down, but yet to someone else, what you learned from that story is a huge deal. And you could be teaching that in a blog or on a post or on a webinar or on stage or in your next book. If you're an author, whatever it is that you do, you can be teaching your audience with these stories that you may not even be aware are significant stories. So my advice and what I've learned is develop the habit of writing your stories down. Anything that strikes you, a lesson learned, a new way of thinking, something odd that happened out of the blue, anything that could be a story that could be told as part of your journey. You're always on the journey. When you feel like you've reached your destination, it becomes a stopping point for the next destination, right? And your journey continues. So nobody is at the end of the journey until they die. So all along the way, things are happening to you no matter where you are on the trail of success. Things are happening that your audience would love to hear about. Your audience would benefit from if you just capture it and pass it along. So, capture it in a diary, on Evernote, on your app, on your note, in a note card, in your planner, on your 3x5 cards, whatever system you use. Get in the habit of capturing stories, amazing stories, little stories, things that don't even seem like that big of a deal. You can turn them into wonderful stories, and you can become a great storyteller by simply going in when you're telling the story, talking about the details and making it really come alive. And you know, if you're familiar with ClickFunnels, I signed up for ClickFunnels a month or two ago. Russell Brunson runs that, and he's a phenomenal storyteller. And you'll notice when he teaches, it's almost back-to-back stories the whole time. He just goes from one story to the next. And when I first started in ClickFunnels, I got some training from Russell, and I was watching these videos, and it struck me. I'm like, this guy just stands up on stage and tells stories, story after story after story. But yet he's teaching me from his stories. And you know, they weren't these huge, crazy, you know, I won the Olympics and these are my gold medals and I did this and that, world breaking this, and I traveled around the world. They're not these stories like that. There's stories about a potato gun and about, you know, he and his wife, how they're going to pay their next bill, or if they're going to do this and that. They're very average, regular, everyday stories that so many people can relate to. And they're odd things, you know, and you have some of those. Maybe you didn't do a potato gun, but maybe you, you know, kept $1,000 in a shoebox in a closet and blah, blah, blah. And maybe that's part of your journey, and that's a story that you might look at and go, well, that was just part of what I did. Someone else, especially in your audience, would look at that and go, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Tell me more about that. And they're totally engaged, and they're hanging on to every word because it's a cool story. So when you get one that comes across, any little one, you can always not use it, but capture stories. That's my big takeaway for today. Get in the habit of noticing. Become a noticer. Capture your stories. Write them down. Use them later or don't use them later. It doesn't matter. But the best ones you can always use later. If you don't write them down, you certainly can't use them later because you will have forgotten. There are so many. They come and they go and they don't hang around. We've got to capture them on paper. And when we do, we can use them for the benefit of teaching others, and teaching in a way that helps others stay engaged and want to learn more and hang on your every word, because that's the most beautiful way of teaching, is through telling stories of personal experience, what you learned, how you grew, and what you got out of it.